We are live now.
All right. Hello and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us on Zoom and YouTube today. Um this this online meeting has been organized by the Fifth Elephant, and I am Anugrahiti, your host today. Uh, I currently work at ArtMeet, a B2B fintech startup, and the whole idea behind this meeting was to bring together all of the Delhi folks who are currently exploring or building into the ecosystem, into the generative AI ecosystem. And although this setup was supposed to be offline, we wanted that, we roll out a Delhi session on the whole generative AI trend. Um, so a little bit about the Fifth Elephant, who is also one of the hosts. They're a forum where discussions on machine learning and ML ops, data engineering, and data privacy take place. You can learn more about the Fifth Elephant by following them on Telegram or their WhatsApp community. Um, we'd like to thank the members of the Fifth Elephant community, whose membership contribution has made today's meetup possible. We request you to support the Fifth Elephant by contributing with a membership. Your membership also gives you access to the next Friday's in-person conference in Bangalore. Starting off with, we have with us our first speaker for today, Kuldeep Yadav, who is the Director of AI at Essential Labs. Over to you, Kuldeep.
Okay, thank you, Anugrit. Let me just share my screen. Hope you can see my presentation.
Yeah, we can.
Yes.
Okay, let me just a second. Let me just share the sound. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thank you for the invitation, Anugrit and Hasgeek team. Really glad to be here. What I'm going to talk about is generative AI for HR solutions. And again, HR as a domain is very large, right? And obviously the applications of AI or generative AI also scales up that large. So what to bring in the focus of this 15 to 20-minute talk, what we are going to focus on today is the interviewing and what kind of transformation that we see with respect to interviews with the infusion of AI, right? So that is going to be a broader agenda for next 15 to 20 minutes. So let's dive in. Okay, so if you look at interviewing, right, it's almost like a 200-year-old practice, right? And if you go back 2 centuries, right? So, and if you look at 19th centuries, the way it started was basically 2 people sit across and one person evaluates the other one on specific skills, competencies, job fit, and so many other things, right? And it used to happen like that in 19th centuries. Not pretty much nothing had changed in 20th centuries also. In case of 21st century, there's little bit of change took place, which is more digitalization of interviews. So lot of interviews shifted to digital, and again, COVID played a major role in that. But it also brings up a very nice questions to all of us, that whether in last 200 years of interviewing evolution, are the interviews more structured, more better? Are they do they have lesser bias or subjectivity that they were having in 19th century or 20th century? Probably not, right? And that's where the key crux of the problem is that interviewing practice largely remains very gut driven and subjective, very subjective. One of the core issues that we see is that there's a lack of measurement or a bias, lack of measurement or a set of metrics that you can measure, right? And that's the primarily, because if there is a process which can't be measured or broken down into set of metrics, then it's very hard to improve that, right? So that's one issue that we see with respect to interviewing. In fact, we are not the ones who think it like that, but there are people specifically from psychology community, social science, IO psychology also thinks like that. For example, there's a very popular researcher called LNI Huffcut. He said in 2010 that two ships that pass in night is a meaningful way to describe the relationship between scientific research on interviewing. So whatever has been published on how interviewing should be conducted and how the actual practice of interviewing happens, right? And I'm sure all of us, right, on this call have been interviewee or a candidate at some point of time. We got interviewed, and many of us would have been also been interviewer, right? And if you look back and look at those experiences, many times we have seen that this practice was not perfect, right? Either by the interviewee side or the candidate side. So what can we do to fix those? And I think the one thing that we can typically do is for with any process, right? It doesn't need to be interviewing or anything else. It's basically measure what's going on, bring that visibility, analyze. Analyze is basically once you measure it, you need to analyze, critically analyze the information that you gathered, and make some changes according to that. And then the loop continues, right? And this pretty much applies to any enterprise process, right? And not restricted to the interviewing. So we'll see how we can take this very, very simple process and apply to the interviewing practice in organizations. Now, what to measure is also becomes a very, very important question, right? And for whom? Right, because interestingly, interviewing is a process where there are multiple actors involved, right? There's a interviewee, the candidate who is getting interviewed. There's an interviewer or a hiring manager, and then there are recruiters who need to oversee the process, and then there's a CHRO or a head of talent who needs to have overall visibility. So there are a lot of actors which plays a major role in interviewing, right? So one thing that we can all agree on is that at least whenever somebody appears for an interview process for an organization, the candidate, the interviewee, has to have a positive impression of an organization. If he or she does not have a positive impression, then it's likely to be a ripple effect where he or she is going to tell to people or write it on social media, and then there would be time to hire for organization will go high. People would write bad things about it. People will decline offers. So it's just the chain reaction just too large, right? One way to say that, okay, what's going on with respect to interview process of an organization or as a community of the whole is that we can analyze some of these open feedback that people are giving. Like, for example, what we have done in this case, just to understand this problem a bit better, right? Like what's going on in the interviewing, we scraped more than 400,000 candidate reviews that candidates have written for the prospective employers that, okay, I appeared for ABC interview process and this is what happened with me, right? And these are both positive and negative reviews, right? And across different job roles. So the scraping that we did was very large scale across different companies, a lot of Fortune 500 companies among these 180 companies, and again many countries represented across the world, right? So and it was a very simple thing. Once you scrape it, then the idea was that can you assign these reviews into set of categories, right? Where, and we call them as some signals or cues that basically who messed it up or who was appreciated in the interview process, like whether the recruiter or the interviewer or the hiring manager or who was, right? Or the process is also a very, very key element, right? The kind of assessment that is given, all of that, right? So basically we take these reviews and we critically analyzes them using AI techniques and basically maps them onto more than 35 different signals, right? And that's what we do it automatically. So this is the paper that we have published. It's in the form of an ebook. You can download it from the QR code that you there. It has more insights, but the idea of conducting this analysis was to understand the candidate's expectation from the interview process, because they are a very, very critical factor for the overall interviewing process. This is what we uncovered, right? So as I told you, we were uncovering more than 35 different factors. One thing that was a learning for us in this thing is that typical clustering techniques do not work for such a use case. So let's say if you want to take, let's say, 500,000 candidate reviews, and you want to say, hey, I want to cluster and see whether I see a theme. More or less, you are not going to see a theme, because the variance and the overall variance in the data is just too large, so that for you to see any constructive theme. You might see themes around some particular words, like for example, interviewer being rude. You would be able to see a theme, but interviewer being rude just is a too high level term to interpret. So the idea here that we applied was that we actually analyzed 10,000 reviews manually, and then we basically used domain understanding to figure out what are the different cues that we want to assess. And we came up with some over 50 cues. And then when we ran it on a bigger data set, which is around 500,000, we were able to get a very, very good sample or very, very good understanding of more than 35 cues. Some of them are here in a decreasing order of importance. For example, what impacts candidate is interviewer not introducing themselves or joining late, interviewer not being knowledgeable about the position. If you look at the number 10, the top 10 in negative is the interviewer webcam off, which was very, very surprise findings, because interviewer webcam off is something that is a very, very digital shift driven queue, where often candidates are not happy when interviewers are asking them to switch on their web camera, but they don't switch on theirs, right? And some of these things, if you understand, right, this analysis is one of its kinds and very important for in HR tech communities, because most of the studies in this particular community has been done on fixed responses or fixed surveys, right? And a lot of time it's very hard for a couple of people to figure out what candidates are thinking, right? So that's where if you do a large scale sampling of such sort, the amount of learning that you're going to have about your target user base is way more as compared to using a fixed choice surveys. So I would encourage you to take a look at that ebook that we published. It has more details, more insights. Like for example, we see a almost 3x increase in the number of reviews that candidates are posting about brands and about their interview experience post-pandemic. Now, till now we have just founded the problem. We understood what is the problem, what is candidates complaining about, right? And can we do something about it, right? And whether is there an AI is a solution for this problem or not, right? Why can't this problem be solved just by interviewer training, right? And that's critically. Look, the number of data that you're going to produce is just too large for analyze to be humans. And on a large scale, like in a typical organization, mid-sized organization conducts like 10,000 interviews in a year. And if you want the talent leaders to bring visibility into those interviews conversation and make sure that the brand is getting represented clearly, you are making sound decisions, right? You really need a process which is more automatic, soundproof, right? All of that, right? So that is where we want to bring a power of measurement in the interviewing. And this is what we're going to take a look at it. So this is the broad architecture diagram that we have used. So basically what happens is that interview can happen on any digital platform, basically, and we have our own, and once the interview finishes, there's a recording which gets dumped into the cloud, and then we pick out different streams. Like for example, we pick the video streams to figure out, for example, whether the webcam was switched on or off, or what portion of the time that the webcam was switched on or off. And then we also have like a audio stream using which we can figure out whether there was a noise on the candidate side or the interviewer side. And because noise in interviews can hamper the quality of conversations, right? So that's a very, very important indicator. Apart from that, we look at bunch of conversational engagement metric. We also look at how the time was spent in the interview, what kind of etiquettes or behavior that the interviewer didn't follow or followed. So those becomes very important part, because overall interview experience, which we have proved from our last study, is a combination of how interview behaved during the interviewer, plus the kind of questioning or the kind of plan, the evaluation plan that the interviewer follows. So it's a combination of both. And that's where we have this very elaborate framework where we can actually assess these over 30 parameters from these recordings. And over time, we have analyzed hundreds of thousands of recordings amounting to several thousands of hours, right? So we did an evaluation. Again, I'm not going to go in a lot of details about benchmarking evaluation, but we have published a paper in IUI, and you will see a QR code, and you can actually look at that to figure out what kind of evaluation that we have done. But broadly, the evaluation that we have done was that actually we've taken some 200 interview recordings, labeled them, and we conducted evaluation, and we were getting fairly good accuracy across different conversational cues. Some of these that you see here in terms of precision and recall, but I would encourage you to take a look at the QR code and just scan it. And it's a published paper, so you can actually go and read it. Now, what it happens, you can analyze all these interview recordings, but the amount of insight that it brings to the table is mind-blowing, right? Like, for example, it can tell you how consistent are your interviews, right? If you are hiring for one job role and there are 100 candidates appearing for the job role, are you consistent across those 100 job candidates or not, right? A lot of time what happens is that if you have developer interview and there are different people interviewing, they just ask different set of questions. So the difficulty balancing is just varies, right? So are you asking the similar set of questions across the people, across different candidates for the same job role or same position? You can also see, is the interviewer filling in their evaluation in time? Like that's the evaluation compliance that you see on the top graph. You can also see how well the interviewers engage with the candidate, right? Whether they're introducing themselves, whether they're giving opportunity to ask questions, right? Where they're spending time, which is on the left side. And the most important, which is very, very interesting, is that what are the candidates asking about, right? Often, if you go and ask a CHR or a head of talent, they're like, okay, what are our candidates asking about, right? Are they asking about work-life balance? Are they going to ask about hybrid working, which is one of the most common questions nowadays, right? So those keeps on varying and topical, and obviously talent leaders wants to stay on the top of them, and it's really good to kind of automatically extract these information from the set of interview recordings. And these are aggregated, right? So there is no finger pointing and say, hey, you didn't do this thing. Whether it is at a level that, okay, and we analyzed 10,000 interviews, like in this case, 8,000, and then just provide a aggregated level so that talent leaders can make decisions on that. One of the interesting things that it's again a real interviews. One of the first kind of the study that we did is that we uncovered that female candidates are actually getting asked more personal questions than the male candidates, which shows a very deep-rooted bias for the female candidates. The second thing that we have uncovered is actually some male interviewers who lead in asking personal questions to female candidates, right, as opposed to female interviewers. So it's a double-sized bias that we see for female candidates. Again, some of these studies that you might have heard about it or you might have experienced it, but this is more objective than ever, actually measured through real data. And that's the power of measurement, that once you're able to do that, then you can go back and take a look at, compare it by quarter. You can prepare your interviewers better, you can train them better so that they can, they follow the right process and the right decision-making pattern during the interview. Now, I think so. Just to conclude on the interviewing piece, which is the live interviewing, is that look, with AI technology and the digital shift in general for interviewing, it has been more than ever easier, more than ever to actually study the interviewing. Right? It's like almost a 200-year-old practice, which was obviously being conducted in a physical space earlier. Now it's a digital, and that gives like the opportunity to kind of study them. And obviously, once you study them, you can create best practices around it, right, and then improve them further. And AI is obviously can help bringing that objectivity and insights into this very old process, right? Obviously, this kind of system has ethical implications, right? I mean, a lot of time this can become a judgmental about somebody, and it shouldn't be. We need to be really looking at the how and why such a system could be deployed and where it should not be deployed. For example, it should not be deployed to finger point at interviewers saying, hey, you didn't do this thing, because again, interviewing is also some sort of a job where somebody is doing over and above the day-to-day work, right? So things might happen, mistakes happen. So I think the idea is that at an aggregated level, how things are going rather than at a personal level. Even if at a personal level we need to give feedback, it has to be a personal feedback rather than a finger pointing sort of thing, right? So that's what we have gotten, and we have done some real user studies that you will find that into the paper. Now, I want to talk about take another couple of minutes and just talk about one of the last thing, which is more Gen AI oriented, the future of job interviewing, right? And what kind of transformation that generative AI and in general large language model can bring it to the interviewing, right? So in this particular case, if you look at it, if you look at the hiring process, right, and you can imagine your own hiring process, or you can imagine somebody else hiring process where you apply somebody else, right? What you see is that there are very recurring themes of problems, right? For example, too much dependence on the resumes, right? I'm sure you must have heard about these people just put all the keywords in the resume to go through the applicant tracking systems and get their resume shortlisted, right? So there are all sort of problems. And again, there's a hidden bias in resumes, like from where did you graduated or where did you work, that plays a major role in how when somebody manually reviews it. The other thing is that time spent on core, non-core activities, like even getting the candidate to speak first time and then the interviewer or a recruiter to get in the first time is just like too much, right? This like time spent on scheduling is just like too much in this sort of time also, right? So poor candidate experience, for example, a lot of time when a lot of people apply, the idea is that, hey, give them assessment. So if 1,000 people apply for some position, the idea is, oh, give them 40-minute assessment or 30-minute assessment, and then everybody like 1,000 into 30, right? With like everybody is spending time to go through that, which is not ideal. And again, you will see from the last part that there's a lack of structured interview practices. And so I think what we see is that, look, these are really, really big problems, right? But some of these problems can be solved for initial rounds or screening rounds, right? Where you can actually bring in some sort of automation, some sort of personalization, some sort of empathy, giving everybody a chance to hear them, right? So, and this is what we are building in. We are on the quest of building our own interviewer. It's been there for last close to 2 years now. In much better shape. We're doing large scale pilots. I'll just give you a glimpse and see how it works for how does it do ice-breaking conversation, for example, right? And again, it's a fixed set of dialogues version. So, and there's a much more interesting version regarding using LLM, but I will just let you see this one.
Hi, I'm Sia, SHL's digital interviewer. I will be taking your interview today. Are you ready?
Yes, I am.
I'm glad you mentioned that. Let's get started. Why don't you begin by introducing yourself? Like, what are your hobbies and what would you like to do in your free time?
I am Rupali Das and I love reading books in my free time.
Of course. I appreciate you sharing that with me. It's always beneficial to allocate a few moments to familiarize ourselves with one another. What do you enjoy reading?
I enjoy reading Harry Potter books.
Definitely. I'm grateful for your openness. We actually have a wonderful literature club here at our office where fellow book enthusiasts gather to share their love for reading and writing. It's a fantastic opportunity for you to join and be a part of this vibrant community. All right, let's dive into the next section. Here, we'd like to know more about your education and previous experience. What is the highest level of educational degree you have achieved, and when did you receive it?
So I'll just switch this one and basically come to the next one. So basically this, again, a short video to kind of show the another section, and this, we call it screener, basically, which is like a first stop of interviewing, and let every candidate give a chance to talk about their achievement, and again gives employers a chance to ask the same set of questions, because the resumes are like built with the convenience, right? So people have built it with their convenience, and you might like some, you may not like some, but often, if you go and look at your hiring process, the first round of interviews that you want to do it structured for everybody, and you want to learn about them more, where they have worked, what is the work, what is the challenging project that they worked on, why that was challenging. So it can do that sort of thing, right? And again, can do a lot of job fit also, right? Like for example, if the job role requires working in night shifts or some sort of that, so it can do that also.
Now,
Like you
let
can
us
take a
move
look
to
at
the
it.
next section. In this section, I'll ask you a series of questions to evaluate your suitability for this opportunity. Please respond with brief 1 or 2 words replies by picking from the answer options provided, like yes, I do, or no, I don't, followed by any further explanation. This will help gather the info needed to identify qualified candidates. Can you tell me which role are you interested in, voice or non-voice?
What do you mean by voice or non-voice?
I acknowledge and appreciate the information you have provided. Voice services include interactions with both existing as well as potential customers over the phone. In contrast, non-voice processes include responding to customer queries via chat, SMS, or email. Hope this gives you clarity.
Yeah.
Yes,
So
I will
basically,
choose non-voice role.
Yeah. So basically, look, being an AI practitioner, right? All of us understand that there are a lot of challenges in such a sort of system. Like, for example, one of the challenges that we face is obviously conversation quality. You need to strike a right balance between how aggressively you take turns based on the how you detect audio. What kind of dialogues? Like in this case, you have seen very fixed set of dialogues, right? And then there's a fixed set of 80 to 100 dialogues that has been trained to speak and all of that, right? So what kind of gesture emotion that it shows. So we have these different fidelity versions of this one. There are some, this is more productionized in some sense, but there are some early versions like based on GPT, right? And again, safety becomes a very, very important piece, specifically when the dialogues become started creating. Like interviewers, the digital interviewers should not say something which is inappropriate because the conversation can go in certain way. So how do we put guardrails against it? So we are dealing with some of these challenges at a different level, and happy to talk more at some other point of time or in questions. So I will quickly, again, use cases for this sort of thing are endless. As you can see that it's more like a platform, right? And can enable a lot of different applications. And that's what we are looking at. And so, yeah, so this is, thank you for giving me an opportunity to talk about some of our work. You will see my email ID right here. If you are an intern or ML engineer looking for jobs, please feel free to reach out. You also have my LinkedIn, so please feel free to ping me there or add me as a connection there. Thank you. Over to you, Anugrit.
Thank you, Kuldeep. We have just one question in the chat from Siddharth, and he's asked something on if we can build a system where, we can assess the interviewee for shortlisting.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I think SSL is one of the largest talent assessment company in the world. And in fact, we do more assessment for the interviewee than the interviewer. So it's one of the first antithesis sort of project that we had. So we do have a lot of models, AI models, as well as projects around how do we assess interviewee responses and conversations. Great demo, but wouldn't this increase the interview time a lot? And what about the interviewee gets stuck, confused, just found? How does AI help them? Yeah, that's a great question. How does it show empathy, right? I mean, that's a very good question, and that's what we are working on. The one thing that you have seen is that you can actually clarify questions or ask it to repeat, rephrase. Some of those capabilities are more tuned to help candidates so that there's some sort of empathy, rather than if you see a lot of today's on-demand interviewing system, they'll sound more robotic than what you have seen here. And the idea is that you get more empathy, give them a chance to answer questions and all of that, right? So that is where, but it's a journey. It's not a one-shot solution. I'm going to just answer the last question that Anuj has posed. the automated interview that you saw needs to be real time, but most models good enough are too heavy to be real time. How are you balancing the two? Great question, Anuj. And that's a choice that we need to take between how creative that you sound versus how the job gets done, right? Like for example, in one case is in that you have seen in the automated interviewer is that it says some filler like thank you for your response, or so that's what we do, and that's some of these front end engineering that we have done, which can take care of the latency from the back end, which when it is hitting LLM or a backend model to get the response. So you can actually balance that too. As I said, we have a more creative version of this thing, which where the latency is a little bit higher than this one, but we are working on that to resolve that too. Back to you, Anugrith.
Okay. Next we have Rohit with us. Rohit is a co-founder at Bootki. He'll be talking about the 7 key learnings while building on AI. Over to you, Rohit.
Thanks a lot. And thanks for the presentation, Kuldeep. I certainly learned a lot about what is even possible and how interviews could be in the future. Thanks for that. So I'm going to be talking about what have my learnings been while deploying LLM apps. It's a amazing place and time to be right now because there's a completely new class of AI. And I know AI practitioners will say that, hey, this has been evolving for the past 4 years or so. But I think now that it's in the hand of so many companies, so many individuals who can build amazing new applications on top of these large language models. About me a little bit. So if you want to connect with me, I am jumbled on Twitter. I'm building portkey.ai right now, which is an LLM ops platform. So if you're building using LLMs or you're building any generative AI application, we provide the DevOps platform for it. Before this, I was with Peppertype, Freshworks, Framebench. Anuj and I have worked together a little bit. I think 3 things, if I were to tell about me, that's relevant to today. I've written both production code and PRDs using AI. So anybody who tells you that ChatGPT isn't good enough to write a good PRD or write production level code, I have proof that it can. Today, we do more than 1 million API calls a day. So we have a lot of sense into how are people utilizing LLM API calls across closed source and open source models. I haven't yet trained my private LLM. I want to do it at some point in time, but I think more as a hobby project. Getting into the topic, I think over the last 3 years, I have built and launched multiple applications on top of LLMs. One of them was extremely successful. We had 500,000 users who used peppertype.ai at some point in time. But then while building the first version of the application was really easy, I realized that going to production was extremely hard. There were a bunch of challenges, and we actually ended up spending almost the next 2 years making sure things just worked for all of our users. From all of that learnings, I've sort of combined the 7 key learnings. I've actually done this talk before. So for this specific thing, I updated it. So this is the 2.0 version of this talk. And I basically added a lot more things, a lot more learnings as the space has also evolved in the last couple of months. Cool. So let's get into it. So I'll be talking about 7 things. We'll start with accuracy, DDoS attacks prevention, making it forward compatible, why we should be caring about latency. How do you do logs and monitoring really well for LLM APIs? Implementing data privacy. Kuldeep mentioned that it's important to keep things safe. So how do we do that? And then the most important across all systems, right? If you are a platform engineer, you're working with platform engineering, you need to make your application resilient. And if you go to the OpenAI status page right now, it's a bloodbath there. I mean, I think it's at about 99.8% uptime, which is actually pretty poor for an application, but you don't want your application to be empirically worse. So how do you maintain resilience? We'll talk about these 7 things. Please keep asking questions. Happy to answer any that come across in the chat. So let's first talk about output validations. I think everybody has heard that LLMs hallucinate, they do not give the right outputs, they may be factually incorrect. Apart from factual, also it can really go off the rails sometimes. And I think the marvelous piece of technology it is, I always forgive and instead build validations in my own app. So this is the format we will use. We'll use, what's a basic solution, which you should just absolutely do without thinking about it. There are some advanced things that need some more development effort. And then if you really want a good solution, what should it look like? So specifically for output validations, the easiest things you can do is just check for empty strings, character lengths. Goes a very big way, and almost 50% of the errors will go away because these tend to be the most number of errors. Check the format of the output. So if you want the LLM to output code, did it output code? Just check the format. Very basic things. As we go a little bit advanced, you can actually check for relevance. There are multiple models on Hugging Face that allow you to check for relevance. So given the context, was the answer relevant or not? Quicker inference calls, you can do that. Rank results. Cohere has a very good re-rank policy. So if you're getting multiple results, rank them. And try, especially if you want to be factually correct, closed domain question answers is extremely useful. So it's also called open book or closed domain, wherein you've given the LLM all of the context and then you ask it to answer a question. Usually has been known to give very good answers. In fact, RAG is a technique that's been built on top of it. Expert level model-based evaluations. Just ask the model itself, are you sure? Or use another capable LLM to do a check saying this was the question, this was the answer, is it accurate? So that's about output validations. Secondly, preparing for a DDoS. And I know as people start thinking about the application, they're not too worried about a DDoS attack. That's the last thing that you care about. We actually got DDoSed. The problem is not the DDoS itself, because we could then build a system that prevented the DDoS and everything. But because we were using an OpenAI API in the background, that day our bill was, that single day, our bill was probably higher than our month's AWS bill. Now that is killer. You never want that. And there are some very easy ways you can just prevent that, because in a day, otherwise it can just be too much hassle to take care of the aftermath. Basic stuff, just add a captcha. Sometimes even users can abuse your system. So add a debounce. LLM calls generally can be very slow. So if it's taking 3 to 5 seconds, most people on the internet aren't used to it. So they will end up clicking the button again and again. Usually helpful to add a debounce or add an animation to let the person know that, hey, something's loading. Basic stuff. In advance, you should always rate limit users. There are multiple apps, including Podkey, that allow you to rate limit your users and organizations, making sure that your app stays available for your entire user base. And there's not a small section that's abusing your app, abusing your rate limits, and you have to keep going out of service again and again. Sometimes when these also don't work, we actually have successfully implemented IP-based monitoring, fingerprinting, and some dynamic rate limits. So as the credit of the user increases, you can keep increasing their rate limits as well. Or if they're paid customers, these are trustworthy, and you can increase their rate limits as well. Third, making it forward compatible. More often than not, this entire range of technology has been moving at breakneck pace. The minute you implement one model, the next model is already available, and whatever you did might have become obsolete. Now more than ever in the generative AI space, it makes sense to build your products to be forward compatible. We've always built backward compatible stuff. We need to make it forward compatible. Basic stuff, loosely coupled modules. Can you swap out APIs fast enough? Can you swap Llama 2 instead of Llama when it comes fast enough? So don't couple features to APIs or models, because generally these things move very fast and you'll just end up playing catch up. Keep an eye out for deprecations. We've already started seeing one wave of deprecations by OpenAI and other models, and we'll keep seeing this. So it's always good to keep updated on when our models getting deprecated. Most of the APIs now also come with warnings for this. As you go a little more advanced, it's helpful to wrap your LLM call so that you have one level of separation between the LLM and your application. So you can use a proxy to do that, or you can do a module. We are actually releasing an open source library to act as this proxy, which just helps you prepare better for model improvements. When the next model comes in, you're prepared. You can just switch it on your proxy layer and don't need to change the code. Especially if you're using a library like Llama Index or LangChain, more than necessary that you would use a proxy, because otherwise going back, changing code, testing everything is just a really big hassle. And if it were once a quarter, still okay, but you might end up doing this once a month. On the expert level, I think a lot of the larger companies are constantly testing and evaluating newer models. So with your existing data, if you can create data sets, then you can evaluate the newer models as they come, and you can even test with open source. So instead of using one model to do everything, you can break down your different tasks and use multiple models to test for it. All of this is only possible if you're thinking about forward compatibility in the first place. So important that we do that. Care about latency. As I mentioned earlier as well, users on the internet aren't used to these long waiting times that LLMs have introduced once again into the entire ethos of the internet. So it's important that we care about latency for any LLM API call. The simplest thing, and I think this is my number one tip I give anybody who's building an app, is just implement streaming. This has the biggest perceived bump in terms of how people will perceive your application. They might still have to wait for the entire thing to load, but if possible, implement streaming just helps a lot. There are new methods of streaming that are coming in for audio as well. So if you're building an audio-based system, again, streaming in audio is obviously 10x better. Advanced implementing streaming properly, the kind of edge cases people run into with streaming is just annoying. So if you want to catch up on what do you do to implement streaming properly, happy to talk about it, but that's a much longer conversation. There are multiple pull requests on almost every library open on, these are the edge cases in which streaming breaks. So implementing it properly is important. Handle rate limits with a back off so that you have automatic retries enabled, etc. And the other thing that's becoming very popular now is just to use a cache. LLMs with a cache, especially if you've seen the question before, you can end up caching the answers, especially with the semantic cache. And you should just search semantic cache. There are a lot of resources. We've written a blog about it as well. But semantic caching is actually a very, very effective technique to reduce latency in large language models. On the expert level, there are a lot of times when there are LLMs that might be slower. So building fallbacks for it becomes important. Building queues to serve your users so that everybody is having an equitable latency. And then semantic caching, we talked about it. So you have basic caching, where the exact same input gives you the cached output. Semantic caching, you can have similar inputs giving outputs. It essentially doubles your cache hit rate in all of our experience so far. Fifth, I would say logging and monitoring is basic. Almost everybody might be doing it. I would recommend don't retrofit an existing logging solution for LLMs. Reason being primarily that these LLM outputs and inputs can be really large, and storing that much text in a traditional logging system will make it extremely expensive. So advised to not do it. It can either get very expensive. So basic is you don't log, or you pay for Datadog or CloudWatch, which can become very expensive over time. Try an LLM monitoring tool. There are multiple out there. Portkey is obviously one, but there are many LLM monitoring tools, open source and closed source, which you can try. Much more efficient in giving you the right metrics. And as I keep saying, what you don't measure, you don't fix. So you'd need to have some sort of proper monitoring built in place. I have seen a lot of companies who care a lot more about privacy. They also build their own internal monitoring layers. So you can use Elastic, Kibana, Grafana for building your own logging layers. But That's more for the expert levels. And if you already have a lot of these systems built out internally. Sixth, extremely important, implementing data privacy. And I think the more companies start to go to production with LLM models, privacy is not just in terms of let's not leak any information in the input or the output, but it's also inadvertent leakage or accidental leakage, which may happen because now you're fetching some information from a database or a knowledge base, giving it as context. How are you making sure that your access controls are in place, your permissioning is in place? So data privacy becoming extremely important. There is no basic way to do this. You can close your eyes and pretend that it doesn't happen, but please don't do that. The simplest things you can do is first amend your GDPR cookie and privacy policies and talk about that this is the LLM that you're using, this is where the data goes. Extremely important to be transparent about it. Multiple tools that allow you to implement PII masking. So especially if you're in a regulated industry or you have said that you adhere to GDPR or just want to do business in Europe, implementing PII masking absolute must. Great PII redaction is by this library called Microsoft Presidio. This is also hosted on Azure as a service, so you can directly use it there as well. Last, but not the least, obviously, how do you maintain resilience so that your app is not affected by internal API downtimes or other things, right? So the basic is just implement automatic retries for failures. The simplest thing, if you're using Python, there's a library called Tenacity. If you're using JavaScript, then there is something called async retry. And other languages also have other libraries. But the simplest thing to avoid failures is just retries. And this is recommended by almost every LLM provider. You retry with an exponential backoff. On the more advanced side, can you have fallback LLMs? Usually, if you have keys with Azure and OpenAI, can you make Azure the fallback to OpenAI or vice versa? Or if you can go a little bit further, why not have Anthropic and OpenAI falling back to each other? We've always built servers in the way that you implement fallbacks and you have load balancing. But how do you do that with LLMs as well? It's almost all of the same concepts of DevOps, but now applied for the LLM world. So fallbacks, load balancing, caching, simple and semantic, and remembering that you can't fix what you don't measure. So going back to almost all of the things, everything will add to resilience a little by little, but then end goal, resilience has to be there. So if I were to sum it up, we talked to, over the 3 months, we've talked to more than 100 companies that have gone live with LLMs. These are 3 things everybody says, saying, make it reliable, make it accurate, and make it cheap. These LLMs can get very expensive very soon. So how do you make it cost efficient such that your bottom line isn't affected so much? So yeah, that's more or less it. I would say that there is constant chatter of, is your application a wrapper or not? My thought process has been that a foundational model is only think of it as the compute layer. Your product is everything on top. So yeah, thanks a lot. I hope this was helpful and I'll share the slides later.
Thank you, Rohit. I think we have a few questions on the chat if you could respond to them, both here and YouTube. I'll post the ones from YouTube to here.
Sure, yeah. I will just go through these things. So what's your very interesting presentation? Thanks, Puneet. I'm looking forward to your panel as well. What's your opinion about chain of thought for higher level intelligence solutions? Absolutely. So in fact, there are, for evaluation, chain of thought works really well. For anything that needs reasoning, chain of thought works very well. OpenAI has this library, OpenAI evals, wherein they talk about 2 methods. They talk about COT classify and they talk about classify COT. So you can either ask an LLM system, give me an answer and explain it. So that is also chain of thought. Or you can first say explain and then give me the answer. The explain then give me the answer works very, very well. So chain of thought then classify or chain of thought then answer is usually extremely helpful. If you've seen how OpenAI ChatGPT writes code, whenever you ask it a question, it will simplify that question into steps and then start writing code. It's internally anyway doing chain of thought. So definitely should be the go-to thing for higher level intelligence solutions. Second, how to prevent prompt injections. I don't think there is a fail-safe way to do that. There are multiple teams that are trying to prevent prompt injections. I think one thing that works fairly well is if you're building your own prompt templates, then pad your prompt templates with tokens on both sides. So even if something comes in that is vile and that will leak something, it will get prevented to some extent because it will become a random thing, right? So asking your question after the input, padding input with some pretext and post-text, both of them have been useful. Yeah, I saw this exploit yesterday where if you put small a 50 times, then 50 or some number of times and GPT is leaking answers. I think we'll wait for OpenAI to answer on that and if they're really doing it, but I'm not sure. How good is serverless infra for hosting LLM apps? Very good. Because this is an API that's hosted elsewhere. So you can actually use Lambda very well. Portkey is completely built on Cloudflare Workers. So Cloudflare Workers is another really good serverless infra to be able to scale infinitely. Opinion on input side of validations. I haven't seen a lot of use cases for input side validations. My guess is because most of the input validations are taken care of in the form input itself. So some amount of cleanup will happen there, but definitely that input validations will make your output so much better. So constraining the input as much as possible helps a lot. Which model did you recommend for ranking results? So it's called Cohere Re-Rank. They have I think they released one model 2-3 months back. Now they have another model and they're implementing one more feature on top of it. But Cohere has this API. It's very cheap. So if you have multiple results coming from LLMs, definitely do a re-rank. If you're doing an RAG system where you are getting multiple outputs or multiple embeddings from a vector DB, and then you need to rank which one is best, again, Cohere re-rank works very well. So yeah, I think those were all of the questions. Thanks, everybody. And I'm available on Twitter or email. Just look up Rohit Portkey and you should find me on most platforms. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Rohit. Next, we have the panel discussion. We have all of the panelists here. We have Anuj, who is a co-founder at Gradient Advisors. And we have Jaideep Deshpande. And we also have Puneet Agarwal, who will be moderating the session where Anuj and Jaideep will have the panel discussion. So over to you, Puneet. Let's get started.
Hey, okay, sure. Hi, everyone. And thank you, Rohit. And very happy to moderate a very interesting panel discussion today with Anuj and Jaidev. So let me set the context a bit on this panel today. So like Rohit said, we are living through very exciting times, and we're so lucky to have been witnessing the great advances in AI every few months. The emergence of foundational models in the last couple of years, the whole API ecosystem has naturally lowered the entry barrier for people. At the same time, industry expectations from AI is at all-time high. I'm sure all of you will agree with that point. And both in terms of novelty of applications as well as the quality, right? However, I mean, there is another challenge that has been observed, and there is some stat from a survey that 8 out of 10 organizations admitted that their AI efforts delivered negligible results or negative results. So in this panel discussion today, we will delve deeper into this topic and cover multiple different aspects of how we can have better ROI from AI with a flavor of large language models, which comes at the end of this conversation. So stay tuned. And with that as a basic context, let me begin with my first question for Anuj to begin with, and then I'll come over to Jaydev as well. See, many CXOs, and it's been my experience also when I speak to them, I found it that they always struggle, and they say that they find it challenging to determine the appropriate ROI from their AI investments. What, according to you, are the key reasons behind this? Is it that do they measure the right KPIs? Or is it because even if the KPIs did not improve, the good thing is that they did not deteriorate because competition is catching up? Or are there other contributing factors? So what do you think, Anuj?
Well, thank you so much, Puneet, and thank you everyone for joining in. Great question, right? So see, there are a couple of reasons why, at least in my experience, I have seen this happen, and this happens quite a lot. And like you said, right, industry's expectations are right now at an all-time high, right? That as if AI will come and transform the entire business. So that is possible. It is possible for AI to transform business, but to get there requires a lot of maturity. And one of the key points is the ROI. One of the key things that I've seen is that people tend to fix the KPIs or the metrics that matter much later in the journey. Often what is done is that there is an AI team. I mean, it could be a bunch of engineers or it could be a proper AI team, but the quest is all about certain ML metrics, precision, recall, AUC, ROC, like whatever problem you're solving, what are the appropriate ML metrics for it. But in my humble opinion, what needs to, and what often gets missed is fixing the business metrics right on day one, even before you start, irrespective of what your solution is. Your solution could be a rule-based system. Your solution could be a bunch of humans sitting and delivering those outputs in real time. It could be buy, borrow, steal, any of those, right? But it is very important on day one, especially for senior stakeholders, to sit in and say, hey, this is the business metric we would like to see move. If this moves, then we say we got some gains. Second is establishing the correlation between the business metrics and the ML metrics. Now, a machine learning team is not going to measure the gains directly in terms of the business metrics. They're first going to measure in terms of the machine learning metrics. But what I've seen a lot of teams miss the point completely is that as the ML metrics improve, there should be improvement in the business metrics. If one is not talking to the other, then again, you have created a problem whereby you have gone ahead, invested a lot, right? And AI doesn't come cheap, right? Even if you're using APIs, the talent, the hardware cost, right? The data cost, I mean, it's a very expensive technology. And that's when you realize, hey, got some ML metrics, but then it have not delivered the value for the business because the link between is missing. And often people haven't even tested it thoroughly by building those pipelines, saying that, okay, if ML metrics move by X, then by what amount the business metrics might move or can move and all of that. So these three, I think, setting in the business metrics, establishing the correlation, and I would also say testing that when one moves, the other also moves, are few key points, I would say.
Fantastic, Anuj. What a succinct and short and clear answer for our audience. So with that, let me hear from Jaydev, if you have any opinion on this. Jaideep.
Yeah, thanks, Puneet. So what Anuj said broadly, that reminded me of what Rohit said earlier. Need to be clear on what you're measuring in the first place. And we see that this is going to be a recurring theme over and over again uh, throughout adoption of AI in general, not just LLMs. And we have had this problem way before LLMs were even dreamt of. So this has been a recurrent problem with it. I mean, 10 years ago, the same people were asking the same question of big data. 5 years ago, they were asking the same question of deep learning. Today, they are asking the same question of generative AI. So nothing has changed really in that respect, which is comforting in a sense. Also a little disappointing though. The other two aspects that I also often find is that, let's say you are a CEO, CXO, and you want to measure impact, right? So the measure part here is critical. Like, do you actually adopt the mindset of an experimenter when you're doing so? Or is it a businessman? And in fact, businesses can be very well served by operating as units that are experimenting things out. So when a CXO actually wants to try something out, do they go all in? How quickly can they mobilize a small team? How much effort, in terms of time and people and money they are willing to put in? Is there an agility problem? So quick mobilization and quick gathering of results. How quickly can you turn around experiments? That is something that is also not very efficiently done in many cases, because when we are putting our bets on something that is so disruptive and so large, it perhaps becomes embarrassing to go back on it in most cases, right? But I think that sort of goes against everything that we understand about the scientific method, right? So we perhaps need to be a little more open about it. So I guess agility would be the other key criteria here.
Fantastic. Now, let me also add my 2 cents to this. What I've observed is, if I were to see AI in 3 different segments, right? The assistant, automation, and augmentation, there are 3 forces of AI. Then the business KPIs for each of them have a different class, right? For example, for assistants, I've always found it hard to put together the right KPIs. For automation, however, we've always seen good turnaround on ROI as well as on KPI side. Augmentation, it's always hard. It is always hard because it gives a benefit in terms of new business capabilities, expansion of our capabilities, and things like that. So depending on what kind of AI is being used, the KPIs are also different. And the amalgamation of it, how that solution comes together. And like very nicely summarized by Anuj on the day one discussion or day one setting up of business matrix, the mapping between ML matrix and the business KPIs, and the learning the correlation between them. And finally, the point that Jaidev made about quick mobilization and ability to fail fast and innovation and things like that. The agility that he talked about is the need of the hour. With that, let me move to the next one. Next thought that I've been contemplating with is, see, it has been, while we discussed all these business KPIs just now, we talked about some within trust, but we've seen that business leaders often have single point agenda called accuracy, higher accuracy, right? Should this be more, should this be right? Should this be, there be the most crucial pursuit of ML teams? Or should there be other considerations that are equally important? And if yes, in your experience, let me begin with Jaidev this time. Jaidev, what do you think about this? And how's been your experience on this front?
Yeah, well, often it happens that, people are looking for guarantees up front. That, a recent example was, if you can't deliver X% accuracy, then there's no point talking further and things like that. To be very frank, I don't really blame people who have those priorities, because, well, I believe that as a data scientist, it is my job to educate my client also, right, to an extent. And in that case, what what helps I've seen is giving them a clear comparative analysis of accuracies versus how much effort and money you save. How much effort and money you get to save by being a little less accurate, and you still go on, you know, doing what you really wanted to do. So I think that this comes from very early deep learning courses by Andrew, and he said that there is a satisficing metric and there is an optimizing metric. That same if you translate into business logic, it works fantastically well, and usually people are receptive to it. It's not like they're not. But the troublesome part is that, you know, if this is not a person who has too many decision making capabilities, that's when it becomes a problem. So for example, no, I'm not asking you because I don't understand that we can do with a little less accuracy and, you know, models that are faster. But you know, we need to show our clients that we have 99% accuracy and things like that. That's when it somehow becomes a problem. But that too, to me, is an opportunity to engage further, to discuss further, to collectively enlighten ourselves further. But yeah, I mean, in summary, the answer is yes. Accuracy is not a good metric of money saved or money earned.
No, great opinion there, Jaydev. Let's hear from Anuj. Anuj, what do you think? You know, what are the if accuracy is not the right one, then what else? What else should business leaders carry from this conversation today?
Right. So I think the whole of the session was very insightful right from the beginning, because you know some of the things which I am sort of trying to implement in my piece of work also quite relevant. In terms of if it's not just accuracy, what else? I think there's a lot of experiment going on in this space. So there's always that constant thing about, the accuracy. But, as people who are exploring in the space, is also what if we try this out? The whole idea of building the product, the new technology, or even deploying whatever's available right now in the space, right? Whatever's new and trendy, you would want to sort of make use of it, although it's not relevant to your bid. So I think that also keeps coming in your mind. Overall, I think build in this space while building, there's always a major trade-off with the accuracy bit, but I think that's something we're living with at this moment with the other tools at hand. So yeah, that's my bit on it.
Thank you, Anuj. Anuj, do you wanted to share? You were saying something.
Yeah. So Puneet, I think there are a couple of things, right? So this is a very common scenario, especially when the internal teams are involved, right? I've seen a lot of senior leaders being borderline obsessed with accuracies. Somehow this comes from, part of this is on our education system also. Anything less than 95% is considered as not a good student, right? AI is no particular different. But the analogy that I often give is that if you are an entrepreneur and your job is to build an aeroplane, now you have choices to make. You can build an exceptional engine, but a plane is not about only the engine. Engine is a necessary part. But at the end of the day, you are not going to trap your customer who is paying for the travel to a great engine and fly him off. You are trying to build an aeroplane. So you need to consider communication. You need to consider landing. You need to consider those 5 lakh other parts that are equally important to an aeroplane. And Kuldeep gave a great example, right? Whereby there are fillers being built in because the model is taking time to interpret. Now, if the persona on the screen is silent, that doesn't give a very good perception to the other person who is interviewing. So there are fillers. There is a UX that has been built in order to substitute for what the model is doing. Now, in this case, it is taking more time because it needs that much time to be able to interpret, right? There's also this great example where Netflix ran this competition for 3 years, whereby they were trying to improve their recommendation engine by greater than 10%, and the winner will get a very handsome prize. 3 years later, there was a team that was able to give a solution that was close to 10.1% better. But that solution never went into production. What went into production was a solution which had around 7% gains, because the complexity involved in that 10.1% solution was far, far, far greater than the complexity that is involved. So at the heart of all of this is what I have found is that people assume that the ROI curve in AI is like it starts and then it vertically takes off. What a lot of people don't understand that the ROI curve in AI is very different from how it works in IT in general. So the ROI curve in AI is more like a S-shaped curve, and no matter how much you keep trying beyond a point, you can't reach. So exactly the point that Jaideep also made, right? There is a cost involved in that 1%. That 1% doesn't come free. And it takes a lot of maturity to take a call. Does that 1% even matter in the business problem? There are problems that matter. Now, imagine you're a small startup. You're trying to improve, say, X% of your revenue. Now, you're an early stage startup, your revenue, say, like 10 lakhs. Now, even if it is 5% of 10 lakhs, it is nothing, right? The gain is delta only. Now, imagine the same situation if you are a Google. Now, your base number of your revenue itself is so large that if your model can, by improving, bring additional 5% revenue, that's a massive, massive gain, right? So what I have felt is that a lot of people don't understand the underlying ROI curve of AI, and which is a lot of these kind of discussions, then it basically leads to.
I think it can be summarized in this, example that I quote often, which is you give two options to people. There is a model A and there is a model B. With model A, I can be 95% confidence that you're going to save, your revenue is going to grow by 5%. I'm 95% confident that your revenue is going to grow by 5%. With model B, I'm 70% confidence that your revenue is going to grow by more than 30%. Which one do you pick? So not only does accuracy sort of is the proxy for statistical significance in certain way, but it has to be numerically impactful also, right? In terms of pure numbers and dollar values essentially. And this sort of ties back to our original discussion. Sure, people are obsessed with accuracy because, they might not know better. That's one. But then it's again, you can always try to push back and say, okay, let's try and attach a dollar value to the accuracy. That might help things.
Fantastic opinion, Jadev. Very, very nicely said. It does tie back to the original point of ROI. And Anuj said it very nicely that these solutioning is a very important thing. When you have a system that's giving you 80% accuracy, which is fine, but if you have a plan B for that remaining 20%, after that, if it is 82 or 78, would not matter, because same plan can work for that balance 2% as well. And in my personal opinion, there's another factor that I have personally observed is the ability of these models to also give a confidence along with the prediction, that what is its confidence on this, so that you can accordingly route that. If your confidence on the prediction is low, you can probably route it to human labor or to alternate path or to second model probably, which is better at that kind of data, right? And the good old methods of entropy and things like that haven't really worked at all in my view. Systems make mistakes with high confidence. That confidence is high and is still making wrong predictions, right? I think with this new LLM, things are changing a bit. With that, let me turn the table around and ask my next question to the audience first, and then I'll come back to the panelists for the same question. So just to you've been hearing a lot about these ROIs, what business leaders think. What is your opinion? What, according to you, are the top 3 impediments for business leaders to ensure ROI? I mean, I'll since we're turning the table around, we'll request a short top three answers according to you are that that can be used to ensure ROI? Is it related to having right data? Is it the right of choice of KPIs that we've been talking about all this long so far, or better business alignment of AI capabilities? What according to you? So open for others to please comment. So while I think audience are, if I can pick names, so maybe Rohit, let me start. You gave a fantastic presentation. Rohit, what's your experience and how would you give us the top 3 points?
Yeah, I was actually typing in my response, but I feel, in the traditional ML world, I would definitely say that the long training and test periods that were needed, and business priorities would change in the meanwhile. Having been head of product and worked with AI teams, I think the most common has been the AI team is building something, the product team's starting to do something else, the AI team comes back, and meanwhile, it's already like priorities have reshuffled, then what do you do? And I think it's nobody's fault, but I think that is where with the LLM world, it changes a little bit because a lot of the pre-training is already done. So your first go-to market can be a lot faster. Well, that's obviously one. The second thing I felt is that in ML, a lot of times for larger companies, one size will not fit all, but bespoke models become very expensive. So unless and until you have the capabilities and the resources to train for everything, it just doesn't work for everybody, and hence the ROI is not as high as expected. So those, I think, are two things that in my mind could be big ROI challenges. Yeah.
Thanks, Rohit. Let's see if somebody else from the audience wants, before I go back to the panel. Let me then pick our first speaker, Kuldeep. Kuldeep, you talked a lot about how you are bringing the change in the HR systems. Do you have any opinion on this?
No, I think one thing that I would like to highlight, I mean, you're talking about the data and the metrics, where should we have clarity? I think one thing is that iteration is the key, what I have seen, right? I mean, you build very quick thing, very low-hanging model, but integrate in the workflow. That will give you a clarity from a business perspective also, because business stakeholder would be able to see what bad or good looks like or what it will enable. And then you iterate that little model that you have fit in. So because oftentimes when if you ask out of blue and say, hey, can you fix the business metric for it? A lot of time, even business stakeholders do not know what good looks like or what they're aiming for, but they know the direction for sure, but they may not be exactly pinpointing what does the good look like, right? So I think putting a model right there, like for example, in case of interviewer, we have these 6 to 7 different fidelity models which are built in. Now, one is very boring sort of model, right? Or a very boring sort of interviewer, but just works, right? Which does the job of getting the response collected, right? But one which is like a GPT-4 backed, really creative, but have a latency of like 3 seconds where the candidate has to look at the board to speak, right? So it just, and then the business stakeholder in that case can say that, look, I don't want my candidate to, or the product manager can say, I don't want my candidate to look at this screen every turn, right? Which is 3 to 4 seconds. So bring it down to 1 second. That's good. That is the good for me. So that gives a good goal for us to push the boundary.
Thank you, Kuldeep. With that, let me come back to the panel. So this time I'll begin with Anuj. Anuj, what is your view on this?
No, Puni. So first and foremost, Kuldeep made a great point, right? I mean, I always say this, right? Make it work, make it better. Can you quickly assemble a solution and maybe go to business within 2 to 3 weeks? And this need not be even a machine learning model. A simple rule like X greater than 100, output is 0, otherwise 1. But the point is that in the whole, what you do is, one, you force people to start thinking end to end. A lot of teams don't do this unless some solution is already on the table, right? And we have already discussed there are a lot of nuances around an AI solution, right? In terms of its UX, in terms of its feedback loop, in terms of its constraints, right? I would love to put out a model, which is great. But if you look at YouTube, right, where they are doing automated subtitles in real time. Now, because it's a real time, the subtitle cannot lag behind the video. Their model is not, I mean, one of the data points that I've read is not greater than 65% accuracy. It is not the case YouTube teams cannot build, they can build greater models, but that brings with its own heavy machinery, which then spoils the overall UX. You are seeing something else, you are reading something else. So there are so many other variables that you need to figure out. And the best way that I believe is put out a solution out there in 2 to 3 weeks. And what LLMs and the chat GPTs have actually done is they have shortened this whole time. Your V0 could be completely bootstrapped on these things. And then your journey will start from there. So that initial point has been now moved much further down, right? Today, a very smart product manager and a very smart business person can sit together and with the engineer hack out the V0 and get the ball rolling.
So iterative learning is the flavor of the day. Let's turn to Jaidev. Jaidev, you may also share your opinion on a question from the audience. The question says, how do investors think about this ROI question in the context of particularly early stage startups? It's a question from Abhishek Nevatia. And you, apart from sharing your opinion on top three things, Jaidev, you may also share your opinion on this question from the audience.
Yeah, so most of what I believe about top three things was well covered, but Anuj also touched upon a very important point, that is the quick and dirty hackability aspect of things, right? So these models, thankfully, that like most of the infrastructure or the ecosystem that we are in right now when it comes to actually deploying models and actually using them, the people who are doing hands-on work on them, it's been around for a while. In fact, to be very blunt, it could simply be said that pretty much everything follows the scikit-learn API, which has been around for a decade now, right? And I have seen so many examples in the last 2 or 3 years where people have done ridiculously stupid hacks to their models, which have not resulted in any retraining effort, any extra data gathering effort, but they've been able to meet not only the required targets, but they have also been able to sort of, quickly jump over to the few extra things, bells and whistles that the clients might be looking for, that users might be looking for. And in fact, if I were to actually tell you the kind of things they have done to fix this problem, most often the reaction is, why did I not think of that? Because it's so ridiculous. So these things are pretty hackable. It's just that you need to be, again, agility. So you need to have that that kind of a team or those kind of people who can actually get quick at this. Yeah, coming to the question about how do investors think about this ROI question in the context of early stage startups? Okay, would not presume to obviously speak for too many of them, but the few that I have spoken to are, well, again, it could completely be sampling bias in my case, but they are fairly mature enough to understand what the problems are well enough, right? So there have been examples I've seen where people have been given enough leeway, right? However, since because of the competition, they again come back to sort of, we don't want you to like stay hidden for 2 hours and then come up with a moonshot. They have to be shown incremental progress. Again, we come back to the same idea, right? So that's basically a very myopic or a very specific view that I have. I'm not sure what most investors think, but the ones that I do are they're well aware of what the ground reality is, and those are exactly not the people who will be obsessed with accuracies, by the way.
Precisely. So I completely agree with you, Jaidev. They're mostly concerned with the business KPIs because they're business investors, they're business minded, right? And they will actually represent the right mindset, the way Anuj was describing about business KPIs right at the beginning of this conversation. With that, I think this, from my point of view, I think almost all the points have been covered. Just add one more point in my top three is post-production. You can put it in the iterative basket too, but post-production, once you go live, I have always observed significant data drifts from what you started with. Getting there is one thing and staying there is another, right? Like again, going back to the school example that Anuj was taking, coming first in class in one of the years is hard, but sequentially in every year being in top 3 is always hard for students as well. And same thing applies here as well. So I think that's another, in my view, that will occur into my top 3. With that, let's move to the next question. We have, by the way, we have got 2 more questions and it's already 5:30. So how are we doing on time? Anugrahit, should we wind up with last question?
No, we can actually go on a little more, around 15 minutes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that gives that will allow us all to have the remaining 2 questions that we plan to. So the next question that I planned is, when seeking the right ROI from investments in AI, which is the key topic of the discussion today, are there specific business segments where ROI is observed much sooner in the cycle? In terms of elapsed time, like instead of 3 years, can you get the ROI within a year or 6 months? Or, for example, business operations via RPA can potentially give you faster returns compared to predictive analytics, which you will be able to demonstrate benefits on a longer term. So apart from business KPIs, are these more important aspects that, because you talked about the iterative nature of these things, that's why this question comes related in that sense. And how important is the choice of problem that is being attempted, right? So will that also tie back to the ROI investment on the investments in AI? Let's hear it from Jaidev first. Jaidev, what is your view?
I've typically seen the technology industry being very, very quick with the kind of returns that they see. If you're building automation solutions for the supply chain industry or manufacturing industry, there typically it comes down very fast, because again, engineering, integration, scaling isn't a problem for that domain. But the farther you move away from it, the longer it is slowly. So, if healthcare is somewhat semi flexible in terms of picking up new things, and especially in terms of AI and running with it, there could be others that are relatively slower. But yeah, I mean, the key here is that if you're a solutions provider, find a champion in that domain, right? And again, it's not necessary that even if it's like a relatively slow domain to pick up a new solution and run with it, there'll always be this one person who's very excited about things and they can mobilize the masses faster. So finding champions is always critical.
Okay, finding champions is the mantra from Jaidev. Let's see what Anuj has for us.
I would say domains where cost of a mistake is very low, right?
Okay.
You can move in very, very fast, because even if things go wrong, right? And if you look at generative AI, right? Why is generative AI really catching up with? See, people who have built systems know models will make mistakes. There is no model till date which has not made a mistake. In generative AI, you can sweep a lot of these mistakes under the carpet of creativity. And hence you can quickly move on. Now, imagine the same thing being able in a healthcare, or where you are moving say a fighter craft or armed forces. Cost of mistake is so high that the entire cycle is extremely careful, not just of building and deploying, even the data collection and everything is very hard typically in such kind of domains, right? So that's one thing.
Privacy issues.
Correct. I mean, that is one thing that I've seen, that is domains where cost of mistake is high, right? Typically, time to realize the value is also very high, right? And there, this whole idea of make it work, make it better. I mean, your V0 could be a rule-based and all that doesn't necessarily work, right? So yeah, I mean, I would say those are one, and I completely agree, right? If you have seen any other players or any other use cases in the domain which you can really champion, and convince and build a story from there on, right? So today, for any e-commerce company to be able to convince that we need to invest in recommendation system is a fairly easy thing, because there are enough examples, not only of success stories, but also you have a very realistic expectation. You can't say that, oh, we will build a recommendation engine that will be that will bring serendipity. That is not going to happen. But to be able to move CTR or whatever by 10% is a fairly possible thing. So because things have been tried and tested, people also have realistic expectations from such kind of systems.
Oh, fantastic perspective, Anuj. The cost of mistake, and AI is not new. We've been using AI, and there are certain problems that are proven to work well, in the industry, and there the risks are comparatively lesser. At the same time, my opinion will always be, and that's how I always encourage my teams wherever I mentor them, is to try both. Have the low-hanging fruits where the risk is less. At the same time, do go for more risky bets in parallel, right? Because only then can you surprise the industry and surprise yourself. You have to put yourself onto. So it should not deter people. The ROI should not deter people. They should not be too hung up on the ROI. Yeah. It's okay to make mistakes. Like Jaidev was also saying about agility, right? Fail fast and innovate. So with that, there is a question from I think there was an opinion from Jaidev. I think he shared it privately. I should read out for everyone. It should be interesting to see what kind of drift LLMs have caused in public discourse and how these LLMs react to it. A very interesting point. And with that, since it's talking about LLM, let me ask my last question to the audience first. And then again, I'll come back to Anuj and Jaidev. We hear so much about LLM. I even heard Rohit in his introduction talked about, have I built my own private LLM? That's like the fantasy everybody is living with these days. After I see Andrej Karpathy making a tweet that what he built over the weekend, all that tweet in the Twitter, I'm sure many of you must have observed it. So the question for the audience is, should we all start building our own domain-specific or industry-specific large language models or foundation models? Should we be reusing it? And if we are reusing, is it like we're not doing deep enough AI? Is that how the perception is? What is the general perception among people? So this time, let me pick others. I also saw Ishita being interested to talk about her work. So Ishita, let's hear it from you on this question first, and then we'll come back to what interesting things you're doing in your company.
Oh, thanks, Puneet. Yeah, so I do think there are some use cases which I think can share LLMs for sure. I think when we're doing our own LLM training right now, I see LLMs are being trained in phases. We're training it in 3 phases, for example. So part of ROI could be that the phase 3, where the data is used, for training, that could be different for different use cases. So there again, you save on cost of training. We have users right now sharing therapy and companionship. Basically companies building in therapy space and in companionship space, both from the same LLM, and we're getting good responses from the model if prompt engineering is done right, I think.
Great. Nice perspective.
Yes. And then to add to your previous point, we actually trained our own LLM for one person. And we've done something really interesting. We actually wanted to we wanted to concentrate on anthropomorphism. It's a nod to the Samantha from the film Her, and essentially we called our model Samantha one in that sense. And we're trying to build something which has a lot of personality. Really tired of using ChatGPT and hearing as an AI model or as an LLM, I cannot say this or say that. So one thing that we found interesting is any model I use, can it answer, can you tell me something funny about yourself? And in today's time, I feel even character AI does not do that. So yeah, we're benchmarking for metrics like that, and finding it really interesting to build something with personality and memory actually.
Wow, very nice, interesting work, Ishita. All the best to you. I'm sure you'll come up with some very, very cool applications that we will also get to use someday. With that, let me pick one more person from audience to react on this question of should we all start building our own LLMs or we should be focusing more on reusing the existing ones or incremental learning? So that was a question I just repeated. So maybe let me see if there are any proactive people who want to show interest, and otherwise I'm sure I can pick names randomly. Anugrahit, you talked about things earlier, so maybe you want to share something?
Sure, Puneet. I mean, building or fine-tuning your own model, it's, building your own LLM is a thing which I would also want to do, like, Jaideep have something like that in their hobby time. Currently haven't tried any of it yet, but definitely looking forward to, working on that. But yeah.
All right, so let's come back to our panel then. Anuj, let me start with you this time.
So, couple of things, Puneet, right? One, there is a general perception that if you are not doing LLMs, you are not doing AI, right? So the reality is people have to understand that, right? It's a tool. At the end of the day, for the industry, it's a tool. Albeit it might be one of the most powerful tools we have seen in the longest time, right? But it also has its limitations, right? Cost is one of them. I mean, you can't be solving a problem that gives you $10 gain and you deploy a LLM for that. You're gonna burn a hole in your in your company's balance sheet, right? I actually heard somebody recently saying that the way the machines cost, right? Maybe it will be a separate line item in the annual balance sheets, the amount of money we actually burnt on actually training AI. So it's important to realize that the problem that you're solving, how central is it for your business? Now, somebody here made a point around ROI for startups, but I would rather put it out that if AI is your core value prop as a startup, at some point of time, you will have to start training on your own, right? And that is where, and you won't have to just one team, but maybe 2 to 3 teams trying to solve the same problem, while one is going for that 1 to 2% gains over the existing one. The other end of the team is trying to bring a 10% gain, right, over a period of six months. So it is a tool. Every tool has its own limitations. Remember, to kill a mosquito, you cannot bring in bazooka. You will cause a lot of collateral damage. So depending on the problem, being able to choose, and I always, there is this beautiful article from an engineer in Google, which is rules of machine learning. The first rule that he says is try not to use machine learning if you can. Those solutions are so better because managing a machine learning system, building, deploying, keeping it up to speed in terms of its accuracy and other things is not an easy job. So if you can solve a problem using traditional approaches, nothing like it, but there are problems, right? What Ishita mentioned, right? The kind of problems they are trying to attack, those cannot be solved using traditional, not just engineering, but I would say traditional machine learning approaches also. There you need the power of LLMs to come into picture, and they'll have to really experiment a lot to even figure out where is the right uh, balance for it, right? Likewise, the particular use case Kuldeep talked about, right? Those kind of things cannot be solved using traditional approaches. So should everyone be training their own? I would say no. If you can, I would consider you as really, really lucky and fortunate, right? But one needs to take a very informed call, right? And I think this also came out during the interaction with Sam Altman, right? When Rajan asked this question, can we build our own, right? And what Sam assumed is there is a budget attached to it, right? Again, right? Different people have different takes on it, but you cannot build a chat GPT kind of a system within $10 million. It is not going to happen, right? It's a bomb expensive system to build and just one training. Now imagine how many times you make a mistake, and every time you're making a mistake, the hardware companies are becoming richer and richer, right? So one needs to really be aware of that. Again, the ROI comes into, right? Does that additional that you're going to gain really matter, and can you really handle it?
No, fantastic, Anuj, and all the examples are quite relevant, very similar. I work in fashion industry nowadays, so a very specific domain, right? Do you need the entire ChatGPT knowledge that knows everything about physics, about material science to aviation to finance to? I mean, do I need all of that? I'm more, but yes, definitely human behavior, human psychology. How people want to look good. That domain knowledge is very, very important. So you're right. I completely concur and agree with all the points that you made about the example that you gave about the mosquito and the bazooka gun. Also the size of these models. So building a large language model that is general purpose, you should see the reason why you're building it. Even if it is a different ethnicity you want to attack, right? For example, like in the case of this example that you talked about, the Sam Altman example, if we want to build something new for Indian culture, right? Even then, if I were to build that, I would want to learn, carry an incremental learning approach, because there is a model out there that has already learned so many things, and why relearn those? And building my own large-scale language model, or in the class of foundational models, would naturally be the last resort when all kinds of fine-tuning everything is not working, and many other things. And there are many other things you would want to try before getting into building your own language model, while it remains a fantasy for many people. Let's hear the concluding thoughts from Jaydev, and then we'll see if there is any comment from the audience, and then we'll, yeah.
Should you be building your own large language models? Absolutely, because so much fun. It's going to be a lot of fun when you try and do that, if you like that sort of thing, of course, and which I assume that anybody who's interested enough will enjoy it. Secondly, I'm sure it'll sensitize you towards what they can and cannot do, because I know this doesn't need to be said, but the hype surrounding this is just, it's nuts completely. So getting sensitized to what an LLM can and cannot do, I think first step is try to do it yourself. Using it, you have to be very careful before you answer in a yes. Pretty much all of us here have at some point built something like a backpropagation shallow network in NumPy from scratch. But when we actually go ahead and do neural networks, we are going to take some pre-trained ImageNet and something and do something with it, right? Same logic applies here. Build it, have fun with it, convince yourself, or don't even have to convince yourself, but get to that point where you say, okay, now I understand how transformers work. Now I understand how LLMs work. And great. And then go do fine tuning.
Fantastic. We have a question from Ashish, and a fairly large question, a long question, like a large language model. Let me, it'll be great if you, the panelists, want to attack a part of the question, but let me read out the first one. For a specific domain or a specific application for of LLMs, will we see an orchestrator meta LLM, which kind of delegates the prompts to SORM or a mixture of domains, specific LLMs that are fine-tuned? So in a way that you have, like, there are people, right? There are certain people who are expert in one field versus another. If I'm explaining the question correctly, Ashish, is to have one LLM for finance, one other for health, medicine.
I can quickly chime in. Yeah. So my question is, I work on biomedical applications, and like there are some mission critical, right? Legal, biomedical, where if it hallucinates or makes up stuff, the consequences are very dire. So I was just wondering, for will we see like Chat GPT, which is trained on like all of online data, or would we see domain specific models, especially for these mission critical like medicine and legal, etc., where it's been tuned on, let's say, all of PubMed and all medical research papers and medical knowledge, or all of legal knowledge, and then would Chat GPT build like these sub domain specific LLMs, and then anytime a user interacts with Chat GPT, it interacts with this orchestrator, and the orchestrator delegates or farms off, like it has this mixture of models, and it delegates it to one of these. And yeah, the second quick question was if we gaze into the future, like, do we see more open source self-hosted or managed LLMs, and or do we see these early leaders like OpenAI and Google and Facebook kind of dominating? So yeah, these two questions.
Great question there, Ashish. Let's go to the panel, but before I go to the panel, let me share my quick opinion on this. In my own, I'm trying to draw parallel to human to AI. I've always, all my papers that are published, I've always learned a lot from one domain and applied into another. Some of the idea that I learned in one, probably in material science, and I applied into AI, and I learned from image processing, applied into NLP, and likewise, I think cross-domain idea transfer at the meta level in the deeper layer, in my view, is very important, and probably God knows that could be one of the reasons why ChatGPT is so successful, that somewhere it is learning across the domains, having very specific domain specific models, very specialized, probably yes, but having general model definitely will remain in the sort of mix, is how I see. But let's see the reaction from maybe let me go to Jaidev this time first.
So I don't know if this is going to be very prevalent, especially referring to Ashish's first point that we have this orchestrator LLM which does this. I'm not sure if that's going to be extremely prevalent in LLM. It could already be happening, but the whole point of LLMs was basically that there is this one generally smart thing which does things across the board very well. So pretty much the same logic as why are personal computers so much more powerful than embedded systems, right? Or like everybody buys an SUV, for example. Individual specialized cars aren't as popular as SUVs are. It's same logic perhaps. But having said that, it seems like a very obvious thing to do in certain cases. And in fact, in the later half of the 2010s, when we were dealing with mostly vector searches and bag of words kind of models with applications like semantic question answering and natural language search and things like that, this is exactly what used to happen, right? There used to be this meta classifier which simply ported or routed your question to the right kind of model and so on. So there are, I think it's sort of a balance that people might have to strike between the two, that let a LLM generalize to whatever extent it does at the same time. And doing this is easy, I think. Like there's always possible to train an LLM to simply start classifying things. That ought to be trivial enough, right? So, but whether it actually works or not, God knows.
Yeah. Let's hear it from Anuj then. Yeah, I also agree with you, Jaidev. There are some very specific domains, like the domains Ashish was talking about, and general large language models may not have enough knowledge of a very specific domain, let us say, biotechnologies and specific things as is needed for a given solution. And there is naturally some form of mixture that would be on the table for sure. But let's hear Anuj. What is your opinion on this?
I would say the generalist versus specialist will again come down to the idea of mistake, right? So imagine you're taking a very large financial decision. Now you have the choice of going to a generalist like a chat GPT, or you have the choice of the kind of system Bloomberg has built, right? So today Bloomberg terminal is powered by the Bloomberg GPT, right? Which is very much trained on the financial data, right? Because in those worlds, you can't afford that mistake. It's okay if your system says, hey, I don't understand. But that is a separate problem between confidence and making a mistake. Puneet already touched on that, right? So today, when they spit out an answer, right, and you're taking billions of dollars of bet on it, right, you are likely to go to a specialist and not to a generalist, right? And this is what we do in life as well, right? I mean, just imagine if you have mild fever or cold or cough, you will go to a general doctor, right? You're not going to go to one of the very best doctors out there, right? Because it has its own cost and ROI and other aspects, right? But I mean, imagine somebody is in a situation whereby they need to consult a very high specialist. A general doctor can't even understand the problem statement. I think it will come down to that, right? And second, in the what will happen in the future, right? So I think we are yet to touch on that question. But mostly what's going to be built is also going to be the kind of use cases people are using these systems for. I'm sure one of the things OpenAI is trying to also figure out where are large number of or what are those use cases which ChatGPT is being used extensively as opposed to other where it may not be used that much. And from their point of view, they will like to focus like any other organization, right? Where maybe 80% of your users are sitting. So what specialists you also train will, I think, come from there, right? So things like gathering of financial data, which is as big as internet, is far easy for Bloomberg as of compared to Google, I would say, right? So your ability of building these systems, right? And this is what I tell always, right? Your system is as good as your data set. So we need to remember this thing very well. So the kind of access they have is also going to be hugely determining who is building what kind of systems.
Fantastic. With that opens up to the next question that Ashish has. And maybe Ashish, towards the end, we'll hear your own opinion also on these two questions. But let me, since you asked the panel, I'll request the panel to talk about the second point is more about, what's in store for us in, time ahead, whether these will be self-hosted, open source LLMs, the large enterprises or individuals, will the open AIs of the world keep ruling this world? My own opinion is a lot more is expected. There is enough expectation coming from, let's say, Gemini of Google that is expected down the year. Where we've heard, I was listening to one of the podcasts where apparently Larry Page and Sergey Brin are going to the Google office 3 days in a week, sitting with the scientists to make sure Gemini is a big success from Google. I heard this in one of the podcasts. I don't know the truth about it. And, so a lot more is expected, whether multimodality of the single model, whether more knowledge of these models, probably much larger in the number of parameters. So a lot more is expected in next 6 months to a year. Yes, building that kind of mammoth foundational models is hard for human individuals. I think that part, enterprises and particularly specific enterprises will continue to rule. At the same time, the point that Anuj was saying, that you don't need a bazooka gun for killing a mosquito, you definitely will keep having smaller language models or any kind of models, foundational models that will be purpose specific and do a very good job at solving a small problem at hand, and you don't always need to rely on large ones. But that's my quick opinion. But then let's hear from the panel. Maybe Anuj, should I go back to you again first?
So see how this is gonna play out is anyone's guess, right? I mean, uh, the the aspect one also has to understand is that open source, yes, but then a lot of teams will also have proprietary inbuilt ones which will actually run their production systems and not going to be open source part of it, right? Two, I mean, you can also call me the skeptic in the group here, but I have seen this happening from that 2009 paper that came on speech where deep learning models first came out, right? There was 2013, there was these vector models that came out where
ImageNet.
XYZ to VEC became everything. All of us when first saw that there are models that can put two terms very close to each other because they are semantically very similar was a eureka moment. And then we saw the GRUs, then we saw the LSTMs. I mean, Andrej Karpathy himself wrote most probably one of the most popular blogs in the AI community till date, which is Unreasonable Effectiveness of RNNs. Billions of dollars were poured into chat companies in 2017 in Valley based on that just one blog article, right? The count of outputs it was shown, right? But you also have to understand that reality comes out with time. Right now, a lot of teams are playing with these models. We haven't still, I'm sure 6 months down the line, a panel discussion like this will also have a couple of questions around certain weaknesses that have been exposed. So I think the reality is only going to pan out in time. Right now, there is too much hype, and for multiple reasons, a lot of people, a lot of organizations have interest in making sure that the balloon goes only higher and higher. But I think reality will only show up 1 to 2 years down the line. Today, no one talks about LSTM. I haven't heard that word in the longest time, right? It's all about transformer models, but that was also around 2019. Now it's all about LLM. So I think reality is gonna come out only much down the line how this entire thing is gonna shape up. But you also have to understand that it is not that we are any close to AGI, right? That is so till date, I haven't seen any machine learning paper talking of the number of concepts a system has learned. How do you even define a concept? Now, if you look at human thinking, we all talk in terms of concepts. How many concepts you have learned, how many concepts you can apply, and all of those stuff. So I think what the future is going to be like, no one can say. I think you need a very good machine learning model itself to be able to predict what the future looks like of AI, right? But I would always take all of this with a pinch of salt, right? Because I often believe that the reality shows up 2 to 3 years down the line.
Indeed so. Indeed so. Jaidev.
A very interesting and I say this about a lot of things, but a sort of, again, quote unquote, life changing books that I've read in the recent past is Super Forecasting by Philip Tetlock and Dan Gardner. And one line summary of that book is that if there is anything that you are emotional about or triggered by, or you're deeply invested in, or whatever it is, and you forecast the future of that particular process or phenomenon, the rule of thumb is be Bayesian about it. Update your beliefs over time, which starts by trying to first write it down, right? And then, you can at least keep on updating. You commit your current beliefs, and then, at least what your beliefs are. Right now, the discourse out there is such that I don't know what the reality is, to be frank. I mean, my slice of reality is just my ChatGPT window for now, on maybe the smattering of a few API applications that I've built on it, right? But I will come to Ashish's questions particularly later. But yeah, I mean, I completely agree with Anush. It's no telling what will happen. This is actually then a good exercise for us. So try to see how and where it goes. Of course, while being careful about what kind of content and news we are consuming about it, keeping in mind that it's the same news that our users, our clients, our colleagues are consuming. So yeah, coming to the specific question that Ashish had, oligopoly very likely to happen. Who knows? But maybe I wouldn't call it an absolute certainty. 2 and 3 again, very 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 likely to happen. Definitely more likely to happen than the oligopoly.
Ashish, you have any opinion, particularly on the second question? What do you think the future to be? That could be our last comment of this discussion.
Thanks. But to be honest, I would kind of agree with all the panelists. So I feel like we are in a bit of a hype cycle and everybody, everywhere you look, so I'll preface my comments, but I think what Llama 2 has shown is that that's the first kind of really popular open source model. And that has changed the game completely. So it's hard to predict if Google and OpenAI will release some open source models, but I feel like for the casual non-technical user, ChatGPT and maybe Bard or some offering from Google, we don't know much about Gemini, that will be for the non-technical layman user, and like for people who can use APIs and who can build on top of open source models. I think we are yet to see, like Llama 2 is just the beginning. So I think it will be like a hybrid. Like I'm kind of taking the safe way out and not really committing, but like I think it'll be a mixture. For the non-technical people, there'll be always these cloud offerings, and they'll obviously get better and better over time, and cheaper to run for them as well, because there's significant training and inference costs to run them. And they'll get one big trend, which I see in biomedical applications, will get to all LLMs, is multimodal. Like you could upload images and you could upload possibly one day videos and like generate videos and stuff. So yeah, and open source will kind of lag behind a little bit, but I think the Llama 2 has set a good precedent that there's always going to be pressure to do open source.
Indeed, interesting point there. If there are no more comments from any of us, can we call it a day and hand over back to Anugrahit?
Thank you all. Thank you for the panel discussion and the talks, everybody. And thank you for attending. I hope we can have the next meeting in person, and hope to see you all very soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks a lot. Thank you.